And so now we're going to transition a little bit, right? We're going to take a dive into the how of things. We're going to take a look into when we're in that meeting, why do we use certain features, right? And I'm going to also explore a little bit deeper into the roles of actually hosting the different meetings, right? If I'm just a presenter, I don't necessarily want my attendees to have certain functions, right? Or if I'm an attendee, I don't need to have everything at my disposal, right? So we're going to walk into that. And then we're going to transfer over to Bridget with some phenomenal tips on sharing. So before we do that, I want to, of course, introduce myself again. I'm Ambrosia Williams, the Monowork Customer Success Manager covering Texas, California, as well as Missouri and Mississippi. So if you're on, hello, hello, and hello to the rest of you all. Super excited to be here today. So with that, we're just going to dive right in, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, perfect. And so now, as you saw with Darby, right, we were in our meeting, right? And so we were went into this computer or the calendar, and we jumped into this weekly team call that's mandatory, right? So let's go ahead and select that join button.
Hey, Ambrosia.
We're gonna, yeah.
Can you just maybe your speaker a little bit? I think audio is going in and out just a little bit.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, awesome. So throughout our session, you may see and hear some of the same things, right? But again, remember, we're looking at the how. So think about a little bit deeper and a little farther about what we're looking at for this meeting, okay? So as we see, we're in our call and we have Diego and Deborah here. And so first things first, I want us to kind of paint a picture and walk through a scenario. So first and foremost, let's think about this as a city council meeting per se. We have a ton of government customers on right now, right? And some of you may be hosting those city council or public session meetings. And so with that, we want to look at how we can control the different meetings from a city council perspective. So first things first, we're just going to play with that scenario. So just from the participants list, if you remember from the previous session, Darby mentioned this is going to be where you see all of the different attendees in your meeting, right? And also who's not there. So with that, we have a couple of options of how to really maneuver through this. Now, first things first, normally all of your settings for your meetings are going to show like this here, right? So we have who's in the meeting, and everyone for better knowledge is that they are all going to have presenter rights. They're going to have control fully of the meeting. Now, granted, if they are a guest, they are going to have some limited permissions, right? And so with that, from here, we have Joanna, who is the organizer. We have Deborah and Diego. Let's just say Deborah and Diego, they are presenters, or let's just say folks from the public, right? Some of our citizens that are joining some of these meetings. Let's just use a neighborhoods committee, for example. And so with that, we want to make them presenters. Now, of course, if you set your meeting options prior to this meeting, they will default to this. However, let's just say we forgot. Oh no, they have presenter rights. We don't want that. So what we're going to do, we're going to click these ellipses here. Remember our infamous ellipses. And we're going to click make an attendee. And with making an attendee, we're going to select change because we want this to show. With attendees here, or with make an attendee, it's now going to make Deborah have limited permissions. Some of the key permissions are going to be she cannot start the recording for this session, whether she's internal or external. She will also not be able to disable her microphone. Why? Because if you set it in the options, or if you set it here, if you come to these three dots, don't allow attendees to unmute. I know a lot of customers have this challenge where they do not want anyone to come off of mute unless it's at a respective time. So for example, you have public session at the end of your committee meeting. Then of course you want to disable those mics so you have clear control, full presentation style, and then at the end you can open it up for questions. So we're going to click don't allow attendees to unmute. And so now from there, Deborah can no longer come off of mute. And so as I'm giving my presentation during this session, I now have full control. Let's just say I forgot Diego. Maybe he needs to default down to an attendee as well. Simply just click those three dots and make an attendee. And so now you see as soon as Diego has dropped down, he also falls under that permission as well. So it's very, very quick and seamless to transition. And then just from a standpoint of controlling the meeting and just full flow of the meeting, let's just say Deborah needs to give her own presentation, right? Well, with that, we want her to stay an attendee, right? We want to control it, have no one come off of mute, but maybe we need to promote her for a second, right? Well, what we can do is come back into those three dots and simply just make her a presenter again, right? Or let's just say you made a mistake and made a council member drop down to an attendee. You don't want to do that, right? So you're going to bump them back up. And so right now I'm going to select making a presenter and change. And now Deborah has full functionality of the meeting again, right? So if Deborah wanted to come off of mute, she could. If she wanted to speak or turn on her video, she could. And so that's really, really powerful on how to control that participants list there. So I'm going to drop her back down to attendee. Now, one of the previous functionalities that we had was that Deborah and Diego, in order for them to come off of mute, they do still have an opportunity to do so, right? And so with that, it's going to be a function where they have to raise their hand, right? So right now, if I right click on them, I can allow to unmute, but let's just say I don't really know that they want to unmute themselves, or maybe they have a question, right? Well, if Deborah or Diego, if you want to raise your hand for me, and then from there, that's going to give me a trigger that, oh, Deborah needs to say something, right? So as you see, Deborah has raised her hand, and it gave me that indicator. So now I can right click here and allow to unmute. Now with this, because Microsoft prides themselves on respecting others' privacy, unmuting is not available in Microsoft Teams, but Deborah herself can also always unmute herself, click her microphone, and then come off mute. And then when she's done, all I have to simply do is right click in here. And of course, as Darby just taught us, lower the hand, right? And then from there, don't allow to unmute. And then she defaults back to that original setting that we had set. So from there, super powerful to control our meeting, right? We want to make sure that there's limited functionality or limited interruption as we're having that council meeting, right? I want to come in here to these dots here. We went through a little bit of it, but I want to talk a little bit about the scenarios as to why we would use some of these. So of course, with allow attendees to unmute, we just saw that, right? And why that's important. But the manage permissions, why would we want to jump into our permissions, right, during the meeting? So one of the funny stories that I have is when I was actually hosting a training and I didn't actually set up the meeting, right? I didn't set up the invite, send it out to all of my colleagues and all of my customers. I just simply was presenting on that call. Well, funny story is we had the virtual lobby on. And so from there, we had a ping of all the different folks coming in. And of course, we had a couple late joiners, right? And so we saw who they were. And so we wanted to just turn that off, right? We're in the meeting, in the thick of the training, getting kicked off, and we didn't really want that interruption anymore. So with that, instead of having to go to your calendar invite and change the meeting options there, as Darby showed us, we can simply just click in here to the manage permissions. And what will happen is a web browser will pop up with those meeting options. And so from there, we can change it and either turn off the lobby, maybe edit the settings a little bit to allow everyone to join, or maybe just a certain specific people. Or if you want to go in here and also allow meeting chat, maybe you want to allow it or turn it off, right? If you don't want people to comment, you can do that in here as well. So really, really powerful that you can have those different transitions no matter where you are in the meeting, right? Of course, you saw last week you do it before, and then Darby greatly showed us as well. But if you're in the thick of your call and you need to make some changes, no worries. You can definitely get to that from the participants list. Awesome. And then when we click these three dots here again, coming back here in the participants list, Maybe we need to download the attendance list, right? Let's just say for the purpose of this demo, right? We want to be able to see your names and see who's joined at what time. And so when you click this here, it will give you an Excel spreadsheet of the names of your first and last, as well as your email address and the time that you joined and left. So super powerful if you're hosting trainings or even in those council meetings, right? You want to understand who actually joined the council session, who actually joined the committee meeting, what email address do they have. So maybe if they had follow-up questions, we want to reach out to them. Well, you can use the download attendance list for that as well. So just think about a little more inwardly about why you would use those functions there. Transitioning over to the chat. This has been a really, really powerful option for a lot of my customers. Some of the use cases that we have leveraged this for, of course, if you want to personally put notes in here, right, you most certainly can. You can click in here, edit your messages. Maybe you have to put an important message to everyone. This is our weekly meeting mandatory. Maybe we're missing out on a couple of people, right? Then we want to put an important message to say, hey, please join this session immediately. So definitely helpful there. But if for any reason you need to come in here and leverage this for sharing files, which Bridget will talk about in a second, or just adding some camaraderie to the call, you can do that with these options down here. But one of the important features or uses that I would like to kind of talk about today is just with the chat. This has been heavily successful with council meetings, committee meetings, or even just team calls when we're trying to establish a protocol on how and when to speak. Now, in an in-person meeting, it was pretty easy to see somebody that wanted to talk, right? You knew from maybe their nonverbal cues or them sitting up straight and maybe putting a hand up. You kind of saw, right, that they wanted to speak at a certain time. Or maybe in some of your chambers, you had a little button, right? That was an indicator to say, hey, I would like to speak. Well, that kind of went away, right? Now, of course, we have video and you can kind of see folks' faces changing. However, it's been very powerful just to leverage the chat here, right? With some of my customers in their council meetings, they have had all council members leverage this chat to say request to speak. So whether they type, I would like to speak, or request to speak, or council member so and so would like to speak if their representative is on for them. It really does add some, control around the conversation, some respectfulness, right, of whoever is speaking at that time. So there's not a lot of disruption. And that has been really, really, really helpful in just getting some control. Now, I would say if that is the protocol, I would establish that with everyone prior to the session, just so that everyone is aligned, everyone is aware on what the actual flow will be. So whether you send that out via a Teams message, or you send that out via an email, or just post it in the chat before the meeting, it would actually be very, very helpful, so everyone knows. Another norm here is when using this chat, be mindful about what you put in here, right? Because everyone can see this chat here to the right. So let's just say, for example, someone has some background noise, right? Whether that be someone walking by or maybe they just need to blur their background. Instead of coming off of mute, use the chat for that, right? So that as we're going through our public sessions or our, one-on-one discussions that we're having or group calls, we don't really want to disrupt the flow, right? We want to make sure that we're just being respectful. And so use the chat for those conversations just to say, hey, maybe mute your or blur your background for me or use some of the amazing templates that we have already available to you. And so that would be really, really nice to use for the chat as well. And then just moving on, we talked about the reaction, so I won't go too deep into that. But I do want to touch a little bit on breakout rooms. So Darby did a phenomenal job of showing us what it actually is, right? But why would we honestly use it? What is the purpose? Well, a couple of use cases that I've been able to work on with customers and that I've got to hear from my colleagues is one was a World Cup event, right? We needed to have some type of breakout room experience for anyone that was attending this session for something of the city, and they were talking a little bit about different topics, but they needed to be able to shuffle around into a breakout room experience. Or there was a use case where it was a session on different legal committees, right? They were talking about different legal matters, different law firms were being represented, and so they needed to jump from room to room. So we used the breakout room feature for that, right? Or maybe you are a court system and you need to separate the two parties, right? Well, use a breakout room session for that. Or even just in a social work experience, right? I need to separate maybe the parents and their counsel from the social work um, agency. Well, use a breakout room session for that, or a mediation session. That could be very helpful with that, right? Or let's just say it is, a social work and they have a domestic abuse situation. Well, the social worker needs to talk directly to the victim or the child who is being abused, and they want to talk to them personally. Well, use a breakout room session for that, right? And so that way you get your privacy, you get your one-on-one or group conversation going, and then as we saw from Darby, if you want to have them able to be pulled back into the meeting or allow themselves to get back in the main meeting, you can make those settings change here, right? In those room settings. Perfect. So I'm going to jump over to the three dots, right? And we talked a little bit about these functions here and why they're used, but I want to talk about some of the great use cases that come from these functions. So first things first, large gallery, a highly anticipated feature that has now been available to government users. So I hope you're enjoying it. But with large gallery, this has been really critical in council meetings when the mayor or whoever is leading and organizing that meeting needs to see everyone, right? I've had plenty of customers come to me and said, hey, we need to see all 16 council members. What do we do? Well, if they all have their video on, and we have, of course, 9 or more, in this case it's 16, we will then use large gallery and we get to see everyone's face, right? We get to see those nonverbal cues. We get to see when someone wants to speak. We get to see when someone may be expressing emotion during a session, right? And so with that, large gallery is not just simply when you want to just see everyone, right? It has a lot more meaning than that. And so hopefully you're using large gallery mode much more strategically, I will say. Now, with together mode, we talked a little bit about that, but with together mode, this is going to be very, very fun, if you will, in some cases. So, if you are maybe an education space or a training space, I've leveraged this for my trainings. I want to see everyone, but not necessarily in full video, right? So, by selecting together mode, I have a couple of options or a few options on how I can actually see people at a time. And whether it be a training event or a court case, right? Or if I just am in a team's meeting and I want to see a team, as in my group or peer group, I can actually see everyone in some type of style in a very, very nice and seamless way. And so I enjoy this just because I need to get a different view. Darby talked about the meeting fatigue, right? Sometimes it's a little hard to see the 3 boxes or 7 by 7 boxes here, right? I want a different view to take some pressure off my eyes. Well, Together Mode has been helpful for me with changing that up a little bit. Now, I do have glasses, so it does help sometimes, but for the most part, if you just need something different, try out Together Mode. It definitely is very, very helpful for that. And then, of course, you saw some of the other features here, right, where turn on live captions. But I want to jump down to this turn off incoming video. Now, this is probably a very underrated feature, but it's been very powerful for me, especially when I'm sharing my screen a lot. And if you ever know someone who shares the screen and they are sharing the meeting, right, and everyone's video is on, well, you might be looking at yourself and it can be pretty weird, right? So with turning off incoming video, this then disables the videos here that are showing. And now I know you probably are jumping at that, but it's only for yourself, right? It only disables it for you so that you don't see all of the different videos at that time. Or let's just say you're having some bandwidth issues, which is probably a common thing for some folks, right? As they're working from home. Well, turn off incoming video, and that might free up some bandwidth space for you. So for sure, definitely use that for those two use cases. And if you think of anything else, feel free to share it with me. I would love to highlight it for you. Now, because my camera is disabled in this demo tenant, I cannot show just some of the different backgrounds that we have, but use these to your advantage. I know it's very, very nice to show off your backgrounds, and I know some of you probably have some of the most phenomenal offices, but really use those backgrounds because it then establishes a norm of cleanliness and seamlessness. As you're presenting, probably as you see my background now, it just creates a very uniform experience. I know several of you have asked, hey, can we upload our logos? Hey, can we show our company or agency logo in the background? Create that and upload that to the system. And so that way it just creates some uniformity. I know one of my customers does a phenomenal job at creating that sense of connectedness with having the logo for their city, their seal anyway, on the background as they're speaking. And so everyone knows, oh, this is a council member. Oh, this is an official, an elected official. Oh, this is the sheriff of the city, right? And so it just creates some type of camaraderie and connectedness as you're presenting. And think about this even farther, right? If you are holding a public meeting and this is being broadcasted to a channel or it's being broadcasted to a Facebook Live site of some kind or a YouTube Live site, right? Well, we want to still be able to know who is actually speaking, what organization are they representing, and just having all eliminating all disruption or background noise. So put in a background. It could definitely make things so much more better for your experience. Awesome. So I want to pause there and I want to see if there's any questions in the Q&A that we can answer or that I can support before I transition over.
Hi, Ambrosia. This is Laura. I see a question about the profile picture. What's the best way to change your profile picture and how long does it take to sync?
Yeah. So that is going to also, I'm going to keep in mind that may be an organization permission. So be careful with changing your picture because it may be based off of what your organization allows. However, if for any reason you would like to change your picture, if you come here to the identifier at the top of Microsoft Teams, so top right, if you hover over the picture that's here for Joanna in this example, it should have a camera there. And so when you click that camera, now you have the ability to upload your picture. Now, I will remind you all, this is a work and professional platform, right? So we want to definitely be respectful. We want to definitely be mindful about what headshot we're putting in here. And so just with that, check with your IT organization first before you do make those changes. And of course, if it is approved, feel free to change it in that way that we just walked through. Thank you, Laura.
Oh, you're welcome. I think another major point, and this is kind of part of the questions we've gotten as well, is just to, whenever you see something that is a government feature, because we do have a lot of customers who see government customers who see commercial webinars or events, and they see things, and they're not guaranteed to be in your environment. But whenever you're attending an event like this, if you're not seeing what we're showing you, feel free to reach out to your IT organization as a service request and request that it be enabled. You may have made a policy decision not to include things, or for example, I've seen customers not include stickers or gifts, or they just culturally don't feel comfortable with that. But it never hurts to ask, because a lot of times we ship new features as off by default, and IT sometimes is not aware that those things are available. So I'm a big proponent of asking, or you'll never, the worst thing they can do is say no. So yeah. I think that covers it. We've got pretty much of the Q&A handled on this side, Ambrosia, if you want to pass the baton. The other thing I would just suggest for future speakers is to maybe leave your video off, because I think we're having a little issues with your upstream audio quality. So maybe we don't post your video of the next speaker unless you need us to for the demo purposes.
Sure. So I just turned it off as well. So is that a little bit better?
I think it just depends on your local internet, but I was just thinking anything we can do to just, since you're doing so much demo work, that would be great.
Okay, perfect, no problem. And so
wonderful. Go ahead.
No problem. I do want to cover one more thing for us, and that's going to be this topic of the roles, right? So Darby went into this really well, but I want us to establish that understanding of it as well. So let me get switched over.
Sorry, Ambrosia. I took over the virtual machine. Do you need me to give it back to you?
No, you are fine. Nope, you're fine. We're good here. It's a PowerPoint.
Awesome.
Thank you. So just I want to take a minute to dive through this really quickly, right? And understanding why would I do some of the steps that we just walked through and when, right? So with the meetings that you'll be scheduling or different sessions that you host, right? There are going to be 4 distinct roles that we have. And one of my colleagues built this slide and I just thought it was phenomenal and I had to share it with you. When you think about it, no matter if you're the scheduler or not, who is going to be that organizer for the event, right? Who is going to be that person? And let's designate some responsibilities to them if possible, right? And some of those responsibilities are going to be downloading the attendance list before and after the event, the meeting. We want them to be in control of that because and granted, you can be several of these at the same time, but of course, with that organizer, it just really streamlines the responsibility for that person. And then access to the meeting options. So if I'm the organizer, I'm the main point of contact to say, hey, can you turn this off, this setting off? And then when it comes to controlling the meeting or adding in commentary about, hey, this is going to be the protocol or the flow of our event, you be responsible for that. It just creates some sense of order. And so I would suggest having the access to the meeting options or just establishing the protocol for the organizer to be responsible for. Setting up the breakout rooms. Now, this is something that is going to be standard within Microsoft Teams. Breakout rooms is only allowed to be set up by the organizer of that call. And when we say organizer in this sense, it's going to be the scheduler of the meeting. So if you are using a shared account or if you are using an admin who is scheduling the meetings for you, we want to make sure that they are going to be present to set up those breakout rooms. And then with the presenter, this is going to be the person who's going to be speaking, right, and sharing and showcasing their information to the team, or they're going to be maybe the committee chair that's going to be leading and directing the call. And so with the presenter, we're going to want them to be responsible for admitting people into the lobby. Now, of course, we can put that on the organizer. We don't really have to be responsible for that because we're presenting, right? Promoting attendees to presenter. That could be on the responsibility of the organizer, or the presenter themselves could be responsible for that. Of course, as you know, you're going to be sharing the screen. And then if you need to mute anyone by chance, you can do that in that participants list, right? So for sure, if you need to mute anyone, go into that participants list and hover over either their name or you hover over the mute all option. And the benefit of the mute all option is that I don't have to stop talking to do that. I can seamlessly come into a meeting and speak and mute all if there's some background noise and continue talking. And no one will ever know that I've muted everyone. So really, really powerful when you're a presenter and needing that control there. Of course, with the presenter, if you are going to be controlling that call, be responsible for having that recording, right? Now, unless you are a guest presenter coming into someone else's meeting, you don't necessarily have to be responsible for that. But if you are the presenter, maybe the host of kicking off the session, or you're a city clerk, for example, you can be responsible for recording that session. And then, of course, we talked about remuting everyone from the meeting and then removing people from the meeting. This can be simultaneous or synonymous with the organizer as well. And then the attendee, of course, you can turn on your camera, unmute yourself, as well as participate in chat. Those are going to be probably the main functions for an attendee. And then, as we heard from Darby, pinning, right? Not spotlighting, but pinning. That's personal, right? Maybe I want to focus in on one single person. I don't want to see everyone's video. I want to focus in on the presenter. Well, I'm going to pin, right, the video feeds that I want to see. And so as an attendee, I'm focused in on what I want to see and not necessarily all of what's going on. And then from a guest, now this role is synonymous with presenter and attendee. However, guests cannot record, right? So if I'm coming from Microsoft into your environment, I cannot record your meetings, right? And that's a benefit. We want to be able to protect that recording, especially because whoever initiates the recording, it is stored to their OneDrive, right? And so with that, also guests will take on the features of either presenter or attendee. So although we see this slide here, they'll take on the ability to turn on their camera, unmute their microphone, mute it if they need to, and then also participate in chat, just like the attendee would, right? So hopefully with seeing these 4 roles here, you understand a little bit as to why and when you'll actually use some of those control functions that we talked through today. So yeah, if there's any questions at all, I want to take a second for that. But if not, Bridget, I think we can hand it over to you.